Welcome to today's Explainer. If there is one thing almost every generation in modern history has shared, it's that they kick things off with this profound sense of hope. From a young age, we're all told we can be anything we want to be. School is supposed to be this amazing time to discover your passions, and then you just launch right into a career to pursue them. But for Generation Z, we're talking those born between 1997 and 2012, that universal promise has basically collided head-on with a chaotic reality. Instead of inheriting a bright, shiny future, they feel like they've inherited the fallout. So today, we're going to unpack the perfect storm of crises that is making life incredibly difficult for this generation.
And this brilliantly illustrates the shift. Think about the traditional American dream. The path of previous generations was a relatively straight line. You go to school, get a college degree, land a steady career, and eventually buy a house. But for Gen Z, that straight line has entirely fractured into a series of disjointed hurdles. It's like a giant puzzle where half the pieces are missing. Their path is defined by unprecedented disruptions like COVID-19, disjointed online learning, incredibly unreliable gig work, and often a forced return right back to their parents' house. The world simply isn't turning out the way they were promised it would.
So what exactly is going on here? We're breaking this explainer down into 5 distinct storm fronts. First, inheriting the fallout. Second, a rigged economic reality. Third, the mental health toll. Fourth, AI and the jobapocalypse. And finally, a generation demanding change. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into our first section, inheriting the fallout, and what it actually means to grow up in a century of chaos. Gen Z was born right in the middle of a massive technological boom, which really should have heralded this exciting, limitless future. But look at what actually happened. Since the 2000s began, it has been relentless chaos. For older Gen Z, their very first memories are often the 9/11 terror attacks, which cast this long shadow of extended conflict over their entire childhood. Then, right as they were growing up, the 2008 financial crisis detonated the job market. Fast forward to the 2010s, and the political landscape turned incredibly toxic, pretty much making a joke out of the idea of stable politics. And then, just as the youngest of them were hitting adulthood, the bottom fell out entirely.
In 2020, a once-in-a-century crisis hit. The COVID-19 pandemic literally shut the country down, and it hit Gen Z during their absolute most formative developmental years. The youngest, some of whom were just 8 years old at the time, were pulled straight out of school. They were left to navigate these confusing online learning platforms with teachers who were, frankly, equally overwhelmed. Older teens lost critical, unrecoverable milestones, proms, graduations, vital social interactions, the kinds of things previous generations just took for granted. Poof, gone.
And when the world finally opened back up, well, it just wasn't the same. Lockdowns lifted, but they revealed a significantly diminished reality. Furloughed workers weren't all hired back, leading to way fewer job opportunities. We saw less variety in stores, skyrocketing inflation making everyday items absurdly expensive, and just a general societal shift. The world Gen Z stepped into as young adults seemed, honestly, sadder, a lot less friendly, and infinitely more expensive. Which brings us to our second point, a rigged economic reality. Let's look at what it takes to survive the modern job and housing market. We've all heard it, right? That well-meaning advice from older generations. Just put on a suit, walk in, hand them your resume, and demand to talk to the CEO. Try that today, and you'll absolutely get tossed out by security and blacklisted. Gen Z's reality is entirely different. They're sending out hundreds of resumes and hearing absolutely nothing back, not even an automated rejection. Instead, they are forced to rely on algorithm-driven gig work. They are constantly hustling, competing for limited jobs where their entire income can be dropped in an instant just based on a single bad customer rating. It is a wildly stressful and unreliable way to try and build a life. And hey, even if they did everything right by getting an advanced degree, it's definitely not the guarantee it used to be. Instead, many find themselves totally trapped. The cost of college has grown massively over the decades, leaving Gen Z burdened with notorious high-interest student loans that can't even be discharged in bankruptcy. While young voters have waged extensive campaigns demanding the government forgive these loans, legislative and political roadblocks have aggressively pushed back. Essentially, the system is telling them they have to pay up, regardless of the broken job market they are graduating into. Now, I want you to let this number sink in for a moment. 26.1%. That is the current, incredibly low home ownership rate for Gen Z. And honestly, the rental market isn't much better. Landlords are demanding extensive background checks and multiple months of rent upfront. For a gig worker already drowning in student debt, that's almost impossible.
The result here is that they're forced into uncomfortable roommate situations, or, very often, they simply never leave the nest. They remain in their parents' homes, because launching into independent adulthood is financially entirely out of reach. It's honestly impossible to separate those economic struggles from our next topic, the mental health toll. Gen Z is currently reporting as the most depressed and lonely generation. Think about it. Gen Z is the very first generation of true digital natives. It can't imagine a world without the internet. For them, it's basically a utility, and they've had smartphones in their hands since childhood. But this comes with a heavy cost. Being raised on social media and algorithmic short-form content has fundamentally reshaped how they learn, think, and talk. Studies show they now possess the lowest attention span of any generation so far, really struggling to stay focused and balance multiple tasks. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what happens when this digital upbringing collides with traditional corporate culture. When Gen Z enters the office, they bring a completely different communication style. They possess a heightened emotional state and are highly open about their feelings. They demand frequent feedback, insist their workplace aligns with their personal values, and are totally unafraid to express discontent. While this might be psychologically honest, it deeply frustrates older colleagues. For many Gen Zers, this mismatch means their first job is very quickly followed by their first firing. Furthermore, their mental health is constantly being battered by the very devices in their pockets. Because they get their news directly from social media, they're subjected to a 24/7, unfiltered feed of terrible images from global conflict zones. Add to this an overwhelming, poll-documented terror about the impacts of climate change and deep anxieties over intense political battles surrounding LGBTQ rights, a community, by the way, that a quarter of this generation identifies with. They're genuinely worried if there will even be a hospitable world left for them to grow old in. And just when they thought the job market couldn't get any more complicated, we arrive at our fourth section, AI and the job apocalypse, the technology threat to entry-level work. Usually, a new generation embraces new technology to gain a competitive edge, right? Gen Z certainly embraced tools like ChatGPT in school. But that same technology is now turning against them. We are facing what's being termed the job apocalypse. This is a looming macroeconomic threat where the combination of recession, economic tariffs, and highly advanced artificial intelligence combine to wipe out massive amounts of work. Already, automated AI systems are screening out Gen Z's resumes before a human being ever even glances at them. The roles that are vanishing are precisely the entry-level jobs young people absolutely rely on to get a foot in the door. Artists and graphic designers are having their work supplemented by AI. Content writers are competing with keyword-generating algorithms. Even white-collar entry jobs, like processing data in the financial, legal, and medical fields, are being handed over to AI. Why? Because to many corporations, cheap and adequate is just better than expensive and good. So the absolutely crucial point is this. Could Gen Z actually become the first generation to wind up poorer than the generation before it? Older generations, like boomers, have built-in safety nets. They have practical skills that AI simply can't replace, like roofing or baking, and they have financial nest eggs saved up. Gen Z has none of that insulation. They feel like they aren't slowly climbing a corporate ladder. It's more like they are sliding down a greased ravine, burdened by debt, with the AI revolution removing all the safety nets below them. Let's move to our final section and see how this all builds into action. Because Gen Zs are not just giving up quietly, they are a generation demanding change. Gen Z realizes that the world currently isn't built for them, and they are stepping straight into the political arena to force a shift. What's fascinating is that they aren't easily boxed into traditional categories. They're emerging as true political iconoclasts. We are seeing a highly diverse presence from them. From firebrand conservative influencers all the way to progressive activists, who are all challenging the status quo on both sides of the political aisle. They definitely don't agree on everything, but they fundamentally agree that business as usual is no longer acceptable. Because the traditional American dream feels entirely out of reach, they are advocating for systemic overhauls. They're pushing for radical reforms to fix the system. This includes demands for a universal basic income to provide a baseline safety net against gig economy instability, strict anti-AI legislation to actually protect human jobs, and fundamental changes to remove corporate money from politics so their voices can finally be heard. Which leaves us with this final, truly profound question to consider. Will Gen Z manage to fundamentally change the system to work for them? Or will the immense weight of this perfect storm eventually break them?
They are a generation forged in chaos, armed with incredible digital fluency, but facing unprecedented economic and technological roadblocks. How they navigate this coming decade won't just define their future, it's absolutely going to define the future of our entire society. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep diving into this fascinating topic.